The Crown is the ultimate authority in this United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and her overseas territories and Crown dependencies. It is also a historical drama on Netflix that your friends won't shut up about, and for good reason. It's incredibly high production, mixed with it being the only place in modern media where you can find the virtue of the British constitutional monarchy explained. Which is why, even though this video will be about the real Crown and its supreme authority in the United Kingdom, we will be referencing the show thanks to its stellar writing. To explain this demigod of an institution, first we must somewhat explain Britain's Uncodified Constitution, which comprises of 4 sources. First, statute law, comprising of Acts of Parliament and subordinate legislation. The British have a doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty, meaning whatever Parliament passes into law is supreme above all else. These laws also apply to the Crown thanks to the Civil War and the Act of Settlement in 1689, establishing that the King was bound by the law of Parliament, and in turn, his courts also. Second, common law, comprising of legal principles developed by the Crown courts and the practice of Parliament. Third, conventions, basically just unspoken rules that we all follow, but are not legally enforceable. And fourth, works of authority, books like The Rule of Law by Lord Bingham, which describe the system itself. Naturally, these only have persuasive authority. Now that that's over, we can start blasting Zadok the priest. As mentioned, the Crown in this United Kingdom is the supreme authority, from which all other authority is derived, following from the fact that Her Majesty's armed forces swear allegiance to her and only her. This is why parliamentary government refers not to government by Parliament, but government through Parliament, and why even though the Crown is bound by the law of Parliament, royal assent is still needed for any of their votes to become real. Many when talking of British politics simply sideline the power of the Crown as merely theoretical power, and if this power was exercised, there'll be an instant revolution and will set her palace on fire. Except this ignores the simple fact that all power is theoretical until applied, and we have many an instance where this power has been applied by the reminder of its existence, merely being enough to remind the Crown's subjects of what is proper. So what are the duties of monarchy? The monarchy is the oldest secular institution in England. Not today. Firstly, as Supreme Governor of the Church of England and Defender of the Faith, her duty is to God, and by definition, to him and no other.
Monarchy is a calling from God. That is why you're crowned in an abbey, not a government building. Why you're anointed, not appointed. It's an archbishop that puts the crown on your head, not a minister or public servant. Which means that you're answerable to God in your duty, not the public.
It follows that monarchy is to be the ideal for people to strive towards to raise them in their wretched lives, and the Crown has gone to great lengths to uphold this ideal of family and morality. Quote, Edward VIII was forced to abdicate in 1936 because of his insistence on marrying a twice married and twice divorced American woman. Not the last time a plutocratic Yankee changeling would try and harm the Crown. Additionally, quote, in 1955, the Queen's sister, Princess Margaret, decided not to marry Group Captain Peter Townsend because he was divorced, announcing, mindful of the Church's teachings that Christian marriage is insoluble, and conscious of my duty to the Commonwealth, I have resolved to put these considerations before others. Of course, attitudes have changed and members of the family have dishonoured themselves many a time, including the official heir, Prince Charles, who also said that, quote, he would wish to be a defender of faiths, not of the faith. Meanwhile, Prince William, second in line, is young, married to Kate Middleton, and has 3 children, Prince George, Princess Catherine, and Prince Louis. It's apparent who's acting like an heir. It also alludes to the mythical nature of the monarch, most apparent, as mentioned, in the coronation.
Oils and oaths, orbs and scepters, symbol upon symbol, an unfathomable web of arcane mystery and liturgy, blurring so many lines, no clergyman or historian or lawyer could ever untangle any of it.
It's crazy.
On the contrary, it's perfectly sane. Who wants transparency when you can have magic? Who wants prose when you can have poetry? Pull away the veil, and what are you left with? An ordinary young woman of modest ability and little imagination. But wrap her up like this, anoint her with oil, and hey presto, what do you have? A goddess.
The second duty of monarchy, rule. Quote, at present, the monarch can trace her descent from King Egbert, who united England under his rule in 829. Only once has this continuity of the monarchy been broken, from 1642, when Charles was deposed and later executed. More than 400 years later, quote, a summons to knights and burgesses to attend court was issued by Simon de Montfort, the king's brother-in-law, and effectively running the country. From the summoning of these local dignitaries to court, there developed Parliament. The Parliament was from here the king's. However, he relied upon it for money and legitimacy of law. The House of Tudor looked for support to Parliament, and as a result, de facto acknowledged the growing importance of this body. The House of Stuart, James I and Charles I, tried to uphold the absolute divine right of kings to rule without Parliament, which led to his beheading. Quote, the period of republican government that followed was a failure. Monarchy returned, and James II yet again attempted to rule by absolute divine right of kings, and worst of all, was a Catholic, thus ceding English sovereignty to a foreign European institution. The Glorious Revolution followed, and in which a nice Protestant son-in-law of James and his Protestant daughter were invited to take the throne, and the Catholic coward fled. As part of the deal, they agreed to the 1689 Bill of Rights, which declared that suspending laws and levying of taxation without the approval of Parliament to be illegal. Following was the 1701 Act of Settlement, banning Catholics from the throne, as by definition, having an allegiance to the Pope makes you unable to hold full allegiance to the Church of England. When George I of Hanover inherited the throne, he could not speak English, nor did he care for politics. So he couldn't be bothered to chair cabinet, so his most important minister became Prime Minister and did it for him. In 1832, the Great Reform Act created the age of representative democracy we have today, and the reason we went through all that is so you can see why the ministers are crown ministers, civil servants are servants of the crown, and why the royal army is royal. The crown maintains the power of summoning, prorogation, and dissolution of Parliament, and the declaration of war and the deployment of her armed forces. Royal prerogative is frequently exercised through the Crown's ministers, appointed by her Prime Minister, who only by convention is head of the largest party in Parliament. For example, quote, an order in council in 1982 allowed the requisition of ships for the use in the campaign to retake the Falkland Islands. Not only are many prerogative powers exercised without the need for Parliament's approval, there is no legal need to vote for a war, for example, they are in many cases also protected from judicial scrutiny. The courts have held that many of the powers exercised under the royal prerogative are not open to judicial review. Quote, Peter Hennessy records that it was explained to him why the Table Office of the House of Commons would not accept parliamentary questions dealing with honours. It is the palace, he was told. The armed forces not only swear their oath of service to the crown, their loyalty is encouraged by a close and long-standing links maintained by the royal family with the various services. Prince Andrew was a naval officer and helicopter pilot in the Falklands War. Prince Harry was an army officer in Afghanistan. Prince William served with the Royal Air Force and Navy, seizing 900 kilograms of cocaine in a drugs bust in Barbados. Lucky chap. Her Majesty herself takes particular interest in military matters and instituted the Elizabeth Cross for widows of soldiers killed on active service or as the result of terrorist attacks. Quote, Such a relationship helps to emphasize the apolitical role of the military, as if support for the monarchy isn't political. You may recall the rumoured coup plot which featured in The Crown with the support of Lord Mountbatten. Naturally, anyone plotting a parliamentary coup in Britain needs the Crown to support them, which is why they did so in the show, and why, when she told them to bugger off, they did. We also have an officially documented example. Quote, the so-called Kura Incident in 1914, when army officers threatened to resign if called upon to take action against those in Ulster who were prepared to fight in order not to become part of the United Ireland. It was an unauthorised use of the King's name in orders from the War Office that did much to induce obedience, since it was suggested that he had personally approved what were perceived to be highly distasteful orders. The Prime Minister's name holds no such power. The Crown is the ultimate arbiter of any British coup. She could instigate a forceful one if needs be, or deny both legitimacy and support to anyone who sought to usurp the democratic institutions of the state, by a lack of support or prorogation of a rump parliament. She is the ultimate protector of parliamentary democracy. Quote, when Margaret Thatcher's premiership was coming to an end, and there were fears that she might try to call a general election to save herself, an act that her party, the Commons or Cabinet, could not have been able to prevent. The only person who could have stopped her was the head of state, and I believe all of us agree that the Queen's strength of character and the fact that she had served many other prime ministers would give us full confidence that she was the best person in the situation or any situation when a prime minister decided to act in his or her interests rather than the interests of the country. The Crown serves as a reminder to ministers and other servants of the Crown that they owe a responsibility to a higher authority, and although the monarch is precluded from calling a minister to account publicly, she is able to require a private explanation. The right to be consulted, the right to encourage, and the right to warn. The right to give those English privately educated schoolboys a dressing down.
So what would you have me do?
Summon them and give them a good dressing down like children.
Why would they stand for that?
Because they're English, male and upper class. A good dressing down from Nanny is what they most want in life.
You have prevented me from doing my duty. You have hampered and bamboozled the proper functioning of the Crown. How could you? My own late father valued you greatly. He believed the phrase history teaches never trust a Cecil deeply unfair. Perhaps not. You may go.
She stands as the ultimate deterrent, the politically nuclear option that is always on the table. Even if she might not press the button, the reminder of that button, and that politicians in her kingdom serve her, reminds them of their place, which is why she has an audience with the Prime Minister every week. The third and final duty, to symbolise the nation. The monarchy is also the head of state, the Prime Minister merely the head of government. This unifying role extends within and without government. Without, as an obvious symbol of national unity, despite partisan allegiance. Within, as an example, if a dispute between the UK government and a national one were to emerge, both would owe allegiance to the Crown. Also, in the capacity to play tag with the Prime Minister in international politics. If the Prime Minister has fallen out with the US President, for example, the President is fully entitled to make an excuse not to meet with him. Refusing dinner with Her Majesty is officially non-partisan, and thus he would have no such means of escape. She naturally also has great influence with any foreign government within the Commonwealth, but most importantly, to local politics, she is the most competent and experienced political actor in the kingdom. Quote, she has met nearly a quarter of all presidents of the United States throughout its history, and had known a fifth of all British prime ministers. Tony Blair David Cameron and Theresa May had not been born when she ascended the throne. Tony Blair said of her, quote, "She has an absolutely unparalleled amount of experience of what it's like to be at the top of government. She is uniquely in a position to advise prime ministers with detached and informed observations, with the political knowledge and wisdom no politician could ever achieve. The Crown is the ultimate check and balance on Parliament that they are on it. God save the Queen." Her Majesty's Armed Forces swear allegiance to her, and only her.
Radcheck was right.